By the age of 15, Mike had become the acknowledged leader of a small gang. It was he who developed the first case. The gang's first victim was a woman. She had no time to realize what was happening when three figures emerged from the bushes and immediately hit her on the head. The woman lost consciousness and the attackers took her purse and jewelry and fled. The attackers got away with almost $2,000. That's a fortune for teenagers. Skull, Mike, gave each of them $100 and took the rest, said Harry, one of the gang members. He said he needed to cover his tracks and he needed money to do that. The next night we went to the graveyard. Skull took a live rooster out of a bag and slaughtered it over the grave. We each took a sip of the warm blood. It was disgusting. I almost threw up. This became a tradition with the new gang. After each job, they would go to the cemetery and sacrifice a rooster, a cat, or a dog. Mike convinced his mates that it was these rituals that helped them get away with it. And indeed, for a long time the police did not suspect these particular teenagers. This went on for 2 years. During that time, Harry says his gang carried out about 30 attacks. But once they were almost caught, a man who had been hit on the head came to his senses too quickly and ran after the boys, screaming. A police patrol suddenly responded to his screams. Then the boys miraculously escaped arrest. They ran in different directions. And then Skull said that our patron from this side needs human blood, and not just any blood, but the life force of a virgin. Otherwise, we'd be quickly captured. So he suggested that we steal Natalie. She came from a dysfunctional family, did poorly at school, but dressed neatly and was cheerful and outgoing. Skull, Mike, gave them 100 pounds each and kept the rest, stated Harry, a member of the gang. He insisted that we cover our tracks, and to do so we needed money. The following evening we headed to the graveyard. Skull removed a live rooster from a bag and sacrificed it on the grave. Each of us drank a sip of the warm blood. It was repulsive. I almost vomited. It became a habit for the new gang. Following every job, they would visit the graveyard and sacrifice a rooster, cat, or dog. Mike persuaded his friends that these customs aided their escapes. For a lengthy period, the police did not have suspicions regarding these specific teenagers. This continued for 2 years. During this time, according to Harry, their group committed around 30 attacks. However, they had a close call once that a man who was struck on the head regained consciousness too soon and chased after them while screaming. A police patrol immediately responded to his cries. Fortunately, the boys managed to avoid arrest by running in various directions. And then Skull said that our client on this side requires human blood, specifically the life force of a virgin, or we'll get caught quickly. So, he proposed that we abduct Natalie. She comes from a troubled family, does poorly in her studies, but dresses smartly and is also friendly and outgoing. Dan invited Natalie to the garage, Harry explained. I'm not sure what he said to her, but she left. He bound and silenced her in the garage before leaving her there until nightfall. Once it was dark, they all gathered, took Natalie and proceeded to the cemetery. She simply whimpered and wept, and then Mike picked a new burial site for the ceremony. No memorial was present, only a wooden cross. The men removed the cross and replaced it, but with its head down. They placed dark candles around the grave. Then they placed Natalie on top of the fresh grave and began to cut her up. They cut into her arms, legs, chest, and stomach and gathered her blood in a bronze bowl, likely once a church tool. They drank Natalie's blood from it. None of the boys could explain what occurred next. Harry claimed that Natalie abruptly stopped crying and, somehow pushing the gag out of her mouth, said in an unusual voice, "You don't even know where you're going. Who are you to try to control me?" After uttering this phrase, Mike stumbled backwards, slipped, and fell onto the fence of a nearby grave. He fell so hard that he hit the back of his head on a metal post of the fence and died instantly. The rest of the group ran away. 2 of them were unable to see where they were going and jumped onto the road, where they were hit by a passing lorry. The crash was seen by 2 people from the neighborhood, but they couldn't recall the registration plate or the brand of the vehicle. The 2 teens lost their lives at the site of the accident. A different member of the gang attempted to flee to the residence but passed away on the doorstep. An investigation team discovered that he died due to heartbreak. The youngest gang member, Dan, made a dash into the forest. His remains, which were consumed by creatures and birds, were discovered 1 month after the occurrence. The reason for the person's death was inconclusive. The certificate revealed exhaustion as the cause, but in confidential discussions, professionals conceded it was something else, although they were unsure. Harry, the sole survivor, approached the authorities and confessed to what he and his peers had inflicted on the girl, urging them to incarcerate him alone. The young person was heard intently, but with some uncertainty. Nevertheless, an operational team was dispatched to the graveyard. The girl was discovered exactly where Harry had directed. Unfortunately, she was already deceased. Medical professionals were unable to identify the reason behind her death. Her coffin was closed during her funeral because the ceremonial experts and pathologists were unable to remove the expression from her face. She did not have any fatal injuries, and blood loss was ruled out by the medics. Nevertheless, the girl passed away, leaving a horrifying expression etched onto her face. Her coffin was closed during her funeral because the ceremonial experts and pathologists were unable to remove the expression from her face. Harry lasted much longer than the rest of the Satanist gang, but he didn't make it to trial. 2 days before the initial court date, he hung himself using a piece of bedsheet with no prior indication of his intentions. This couldn't be classified as murder, but the authorities dealt with the death as a suicide and closed the investigation without further looking into the mystery of the incident. And the person leading the investigation into Natalie's murder abruptly stated to a journalist, "I pray that those foolish individuals who were released will not be joining them." Thank you for watching this story. Please subscribe and explore the other stories I have gathered for you. You are sure to enjoy them. Also, if you would like to share your own story on our videos, please write about it in the comments. We will share the most fascinating stories. Goodbye, everyone. I will attempt to sleep now.
I had just turned 13, and my mom had finally trusted me to stay home alone with my little brother. He was only a year younger than me, but he was still little in my eyes. I was super excited. We had been allowed to rent a movie, and she bought us a ton of snacks. And for meals, she left us with money to order a pizza. The evening started out great. We were having a blast watching Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. We hadn't been able to see it in theaters, so it was awesome. It must have been around 8 at night when my brother pointed out that it was snowing outside. And when I looked out the window, I was pleasantly surprised. The sky was just pouring snow, and to a young kid, that was the best. I couldn't wait to potentially go sledding the next day. After a while, me and my brother lay down and went to bed. I double-checked to make sure everything was locked and it was time to sleep. The next day when we woke up, we noticed right away that the house was ice cold. And when I went to turn on the TV, we realized the power had gone out. This wasn't a huge deal for us. We figured we would hang out under some blankets and play cards until my mom got home. Only as time passed, she didn't get home. When I finally decided to look outside, I was amazed at how much snow was on the ground. We had gotten at least 3 feet of snow overnight. Even as a kid, I knew this meant Mom would be stuck out of town for the rest of the day. Now, I don't blame cartoons for my actions. I made them on my own. But I will say that I sure got the idea from watching TV. And since I knew we were going to be cold, I grabbed the metal trash can from the kitchen, dragged it into the living room, and began to start a small fire in hope to generate heat. To this day, I still don't understand what I was thinking, but to a young kid it seemed like a decent idea at the time. Little did I know about carbon monoxide and that I would have to have a window open, and even then it wouldn't have been a good idea. But because I knew none of this, I started a small fire with some torn up newspaper, and for a minute it was amazing. The warmth was so nice. But after about 45 minutes, me and my brother began to grow really tired. And not thinking anything of it, we decided to take a nap, especially since the fire wasn't roaring. Sleep seemed like a great way to pass the time. I woke up being carried out of the house on a stretcher. It turned out my mom managed to get home. They plowed the roads with no problem once the snow had stopped, but by the time she got home, my brother and I passed out from the carbon monoxide in the air. The paramedics told her that had she not showed up, the two of us probably wouldn't have made it. When she came home, we were hardly breathing. It was the middle of December back in 2009, and my family and I had been attending the company's Christmas party. This was an annual thing, and my kid loved it. The company would hire someone to dress up as Santa, and it was nice for the workers because it was usually when we were given our bonuses. It had been a slow year for the company, but we were all happy with what we were given. And all in all, the evening at the party was a hit. The drive home, not so much. We loaded up into our Dodge Caravan and got a movie set up for our son, although we knew he would fall asleep shortly after we got moving. I remember as we were leaving, one of my coworkers laughed and said that I had the right idea because a snowstorm was heading that way and it was safer to leave the party then. I hadn't heard anything about a storm, so I just assumed he meant a flurry. No big deal, nothing we weren't used to driving in. So we started down the road, and within a matter of minutes my wife let me know that our son had nodded off. So we turned down the volume of the speakers, and it wasn't long after that we began to see the snowflakes hit the high beams of the car. Again, this wasn't anything new, so we weren't too concerned. I slowed down a bit, of course, but no big deal. Or so I thought. After a few minutes of light flurries, they began to get larger, and within a matter of seconds we couldn't see the road ahead of us. It was just coming down. In hindsight, if I had been paying attention to the news all week, I would have known that we were expecting a small blizzard in our area. We tried our best to make it home, but at some point we had to make a decision to pull over. We had quite a bit of windy roads down the mountain to get home, and with our kid in the car, it just didn't seem safe. I pulled the car over and we were on a slight hill, so I made sure to put the emergency brake up. We made sure to bundle up in blankets we had lying in the back of the van for emergencies and did our best to get comfortable. Our son thought it was like a camping trip, so he was totally fine with the situation. However, a bad situation would turn worse after a few hours. I'm still not quite sure what caused the snow to begin to freeze. Maybe it was a rise and dip in the temperature, but somehow while we were asleep, the entire road of the hill in front of us became a sheet of ice. And I'm not sure if it was us tossing and turning in our sleep that shifted the van ever so slightly, but somehow the ice ended up under our tires, and I awoke to our van sliding rapidly downhill. My wife woke up and quickly wrapped her arms around our son while I tried to figure out something to do. But I knew right away there was nothing. The emergency brake was already up. There was no way to stop us unless we happened to just stop on our own. I could tell we were picking up serious momentum, so I too joined my wife and our son in an embrace and got ready for the worst to happen. Then, out of nowhere, bam! I heard the back of the van smash into something. But we stopped. I checked on my family and they were all okay. When I checked to see what stopped the van, it turned out to be a large rock, just big enough for the bottom of the van to get launched onto it. The bone-chilling part is, had we not stopped, the van would have likely slid right off the side of the mountain at a steep 20+ foot drop-off. As an avid hiker, but someone who is not fond of the cold, winter is basically my worst enemy. I can't climb where I want to climb, and most of the trails are closed, and it's usually too cold to visit those that are open anyway. One year though, winter seemed to be coming late, as it was still pretty nice out toward the beginning of December. But finally the weather report said a heavy snowstorm was coming and that winter was officially on its way. I was under the impression that I had a whole day before the snowstorm was to get here, so I decided to bundle up and do my best to ignore the cold so that I could enjoy one last hike of the season before locking myself away like a groundhog. I made it to the trail. I put my back on, which I always brought. I made sure to have some water and a trail snack just in case something went wrong. As I made my way through the trail, I was pleasantly surprised with how empty it was. It wasn't a nice day or anything, but I still expected to see somebody. After about 4 miles into my hike, I was getting ready to turn around when I noticed the flurries begin to come down. I immediately got upset and knew that I needed to turn around, but even if I hustled back to my car, it was at least a 2-hour walk down the steep trail. Even more since I knew I would have to take my time with some snow on the ground. But I began to make my way back down the trail and everything was fine, although I was getting nervous about how fast the snow was piling up. By the time I reached the halfway point, I couldn't even see the trail. It was just a blanket of white, and I tried not to panic as I knew I would have to guide myself out. I had walked that trail countless times, but you would be amazed how different things look in the snow. I kept moving forward through at least a little while as I made my way along a narrow part of the trail. My foot ended up slipping on the rock that had been covered in the loose snow, and that was when I heard the cracking sound of my ankle snapping. It probably wasn't too loud, but at the moment it sounded like a whip cracking. The pain set in immediately as I dropped to the ground, and panic set in soon after that. I couldn't walk back to my car and there was no way that anyone would be on the trail right now to help me. I pulled my phone out, hoping that I had service, and lucky for me, I had about a half a bar. But that was enough. I called for help and they actually had to send the fire department into the trail to rescue me. By the time they got to me, they said I was showing signs of mild hypothermia. And what's even scarier is that my phone died almost right after they put me into an ambulance. I probably would have still been walking down the trail at the time and had this happen when my phone was dead. I likely would have been close behind it. When I was younger, me and my friends would always have big man hunting games in the snow. This wooden January night. We were 13, and there was this crazy blizzard going on. We continued our tradition. We had a group of 6 people playing, 3 in each team. This game was more or less tagged, but it involved hiding and running to an assigned safe point, which for us was the front stoop. It was fun in the summer, but the snow only made it so much better. But with the snow adding as a hiding and slowing down factor, hunting down footprints, and even using snowballs as weapons to slow down chasers, it was the most fun game of our childhoods until this particular year. Things turned pretty bad. It was our turn to hide. I'll give you the names of my teammates to make things more easy to follow. Dan and Christian. Dan hopped a fence to someone's backyard on the other side of the block, which wasn't really cheating, as we had no limits to this game. Christian jumped on top of my other friend's shed in the backyard and hid behind the sloped roof. I thought it'd be sneaky and started running all around the backyard to create seemingly endless trail of footprints. When our friends from the other side of the house announced that they were coming, I had to think quick. I did something that just wasn't too pleasant. First, I signaled for Christian on top of the roof to run if I were to run myself. And then I hopped in the bushes and laid flat in the snow. 2 of the others entered the backyard and started analyzing the crazy footprint paths I created. I knew it would lead to me, though, so I had to be ready to run if they got close. They were getting closer to the bushes I was hiding in. So Christian jumped down from the shed into the snow and darted for the front lawn. The 2 chased after him in both directions. I knew the stoop would be guarded right now, so I took this opportunity to better hide myself. I decided to follow Dan's approach and hopped onto the roof of the shed, then over the fence to the backyard on the other side of the block. I didn't see Dan anywhere, though. I looked for his footprints, but quickly found some other kind of tracks in the snow. By the fence were a few boot marks from where Dan must have landed. But then quickly the marks turned into a steady trail of something being pushed or dragged through the snow. I followed the trail to the back door of the pitch-black house, and then I stopped. I quickly put 2 and 2 together. My heart sank, and I turned and headed back to the fence to hop over and call for my friend's parents. But about halfway across the yard, I heard the sliding door of the house open and someone wearing a black coat with a hood covering in their face emerged and started stomping over to me. I screamed like a girl as I pulled myself over the fence, as I just barely making it. Before he could grab my legs, all of my friends came running to the backyard. Then shortly after, my friend's parents came out the back door. I told them what happened and the mom phoned the police while the dad stormed to the other side of the block with a gun and knocked on the door. There was no answer, so he let himself in. As we watched, the door was unlocked. He had his weight outside within a few minutes, came out with Dan in his arms. He was knocked out. His face looked red and wounded, as if he were hit in the face by a shovel or something. There was no car in the driveway indicating the guy left when I escaped his yard. He never returned to his house, and I'm pretty sure he's still wanted to the police by this day. It just goes to show anybody out there, even your next door neighbor, may be a predator just waiting for an opportunity to strike. Now, if there's one thing that you should always do before going up a mountain is to make sure that you're prepared for anything. This one time, about a week and a half before my 27th birthday, I was celebrating a bit early with a couple of friends of mine. The 3 of us had saved up enough money to take a 2-week trip to Canada so that we could hit a few of the mountains up there. And honestly, it was beautiful at first. The way the snow was littered with small bits of green from the pine trees sticking out was like something you would see in the movies. Every second that we were there seemed exciting, and from the moment we landed we couldn't wait to get our boots on and hit the slopes. But we landed later in the day. We got off the plane and took a cab to the car rental service that we were using. And the worker there recommended that we get a truck so that we could carry all of our gear, which sounded perfect to me. And in no time at all, we were checking into our hotel room and planning out the next day. The following morning we all made sure to wake up early enough to grab a quick bite to eat on our way to the mountain, and within the first hours of being up, we were all happily tearing through the snow. It was perfect. The snow on the ground wasn't packed down too tight, and the snow falling around us made it seem like we showed up at the right time. Little did we know the snow we were seeing was actually the outer edge of a blizzard that was heading right toward us. The weather turned faster than I had ever seen before, and without a second of notice. The sky was a deep gray, and the snow was coming down much faster, limiting our visibility. We all met up in one spot and decided to call it a day, and one by one we began heading down the mountain. I had been skiing the longest and could help anyone if they needed it, so I decided to position myself in the back of the line in case anyone fell. However, as we made our way down the mountain toward our truck, the visibility only continued to get worse, and even though I thought I was following behind the group, I somehow managed to veer a bit off course and smacked right into a small tree that was poking out of the snow. I felt the wind knock out of me as I made contact with the tree and began tumbling forward. I hoped that my skis would just unclip as I hit the snow, but that wasn't the case. At one point, as I was rolling through the snow, my left ski dug into the snow, and as my body continued to fly forward, I felt something in my leg snap. I let out a piercing scream that luckily was able to cut through the storm and caught my friend's attention, who was in front of me. He turned and made his way over to me and immediately knew that I needed assistance ASAP. We agreed that he wouldn't be able to get me down on his own, so he decided to go and get help. I was laying in the ice-cold snow for about 45 minutes before I finally saw the light of an EMT riding on a snowmobile coming up the mountain. He slowly moved me onto a sled-like gurney that was attached to the back of his vehicle, and we made our way down the mountain. Once I had gotten to the hospital, the doctor had to cut through my snowsuit to get it off and reveal my leg. I almost passed out as I saw the small bit of shin bone piercing through the skin. I had gotten a compound fracture, and I don't know what hurt worse, the bone breaking or the doctor pushing it back into place. In total, it took me 6 months to heal, with a year of physical therapy on top of that. I'll never forget that trip. Living in New York, winter can be a fickle season depending on the year. While some winters feel as though they were entirely devoid of snow, others felt as if the snow wouldn't stop falling from the sky. Probably the worst snowfall I had ever experienced is during the blizzard of 2005. That year there must have been at least 4.5 feet or more of snow piled up after the 3-day storm had finally ended. I had just turned 19 and moved into a small 2-bedroom house with a friend of mine from high school, and honestly, the first day it snowed was a bunch of fun. We played in the snow with our neighbors' kids like a couple of overgrown children, and then even had hot chocolate after warming up inside. However, everything started to take a turn for the worst after waking up the following morning. Initially, we had expected the snow to stop at some point overnight, and though we loaded the idea of shoveling the driveway, we figured the roads would be good enough for us to drive to work. But that wasn't the case at all. At some point throughout the night our power went out, which was later discovered was due to freezing power lines. And when I looked out my bedroom window, not only did I realize that it hadn't stopped snowing, but it was awestruck by the amount that had accumulated overnight. In just the first 24 hours alone, it looked like almost 3 feet had piled up, and as far as we could tell, there was no sign of any snowplows. My roommate and I couldn't reach out to our families because the power was out and neither of us had signed up for a cell phone plan yet, so until we managed to be dug out, we were on our own. By the time noon came around, the house had cooled down to the point where we could practically see our breath, and it almost seemed like the blankets weren't helping keeping in any of our body heat. But we did everything we could to just power through it, hoping that the power would be restored soon. That wasn't the case though, and as the sun went down, the house only grew colder. We lit a few emergency candles so that we could see and ate some cold-cut sandwiches for dinner as we held our hands over the candle's flame to keep warm. It didn't help much though, and by that point I would have given anything to get warm. The rest of the night was tough and we got hardly any sleep. Almost every second was spent hoping that the light, and more importantly the heat, would kick on. And on the morning of the 3rd day of the storm, I had an idea that to this day might be one of the dumbest things I've ever done. You see, when I woke up that morning I noticed my car keys sitting on the coffee table, and I thought that I could somehow make my way out of the house and into my car. I might be able to turn it on and heat it up for a little while. Now that I'm a little bit wiser, I realized that most likely wouldn't have worked. But I never got to find out because as soon as I opened the front door, I saw that the snow had continued to pile in. It was now basically up to my chin. I didn't let that stop me though, so I put on the only pair of gloves I had, which were small and knitted poorly, and I began scooping the snow in as big of piles as I could and throwing it to the side. My process worked for about 5 minutes before my gloves had become entirely soaked, and had I stopped there, I might have been fine, but I decided to push on. I made it about 10 feet away from my front door before I basically dropped to my knees in pain. My hands had become so cold that they felt like they were on fire and being cut by a serrated blade. I made my way back into the house and took my gloves off to the most horrifying sight I had ever seen. From the fingertips down to just about the knuckle, almost all of my fingers had turned a deep purple, as if they were badly broken. I tried to warm them over an emergency candle, but that only made them hurt even more. And to make matters worse, there was no way that I could make it to the hospital by myself, and we had no way of calling for help. Thankfully, the power ended up being restored by around 11 p.m. And on that third night, shortly after the snow stopped coming down, the first thing we did was call 911, who was able to send an ambulance. Though it took them about 2 hours to get to the house. While we waited, we let our families know that we were okay. Aside from my hands, as soon as the paramedic took a look at my hand, they told me I was likely going to have nerve damage in my hand. But nothing prepared me for when the doctor told me that I was going to lose 2 fingers on my right hand, my thumb and index fingers. I suppose it could have been worse though. This day, one of my favorite outdoor activities has to be skiing. If I'm not skiing, there's no reason for me to be out in the snow. It was 2009. I had 2 weeks left until summer break. Me and my friends decided to celebrate summer break with a sleepover. Over the next 2 weeks, I got everything ready at my mom's house. Candy decorations, games, the works. Then came the final day of school. The bell rang and I was free from this hellhole. I walked to my house and then knocked on my neighbor's door. I wanted his daughter to come to hang out with my other friends. Her dad said that she could, but she would need to be back by 1 a.m. It was a bit of a bummer since we wanted this to be a whole night sleepover. But it was better than nothing. I told her the time that it would start. After that, I started to set up everything. My mom would be working and my dad was gonna be buying some more snacks for the sleepover. Let's go. I'm done. After that, I texted all my friends in a group chat. I then walked to my neighbor's house, rang the doorbell, and waited. And waited. And waited. I rang it again and then my friend opened the door. I could tell her eyes were watery and I had a pretty good idea why. You see, my neighbor was a drinker and he also used drugs, and I'm almost certain he abused his daughter. Beat her, raped her, everything. But I didn't know this at the time. And I didn't bring it up. I got her to the house and we watched some TV while we waited for the others to arrive. About 20 minutes later they arrived, and the sleepover began. We binge-watched shows, we ate tons of candy and sweets, we played Truth or Dare, and we played some scary games. We were just enjoying ourselves. Then my neighbor's daughter realized that she needed to be home by 1 a.m. and it was 3 a.m. The others said they were gonna catch some Z's and I told them that I would drop my neighbor's daughter off. So I walked her back to the house. We were talking about what we would do over the summer. I told her I would get a part-time job and she said I'll just try to get my life back together. Haha, I could tell that she was fake laughing. I decided to ask, why would you need to get your life back together? Is something wrong? She said nothing, with a smirk. Here's your house, see ya. I said. Bye, she said. I could see through the window that her dad was drinking. After this, I went back to my house and kept watching a TV show that I was addicted to at the time. After about 12 episodes, I heard screams outside my window. I could see that someone was running away from my neighbor's house and headed towards mine. I screamed, "What the fuck, AH?" I dashed to the kitchen and I peeked out of the wall and saw that it was my neighbor's daughter, and I could barely recognize her. There was a knife in her back and her hands were cut off. Her whole body was bloody and she was pouring blood from her mouth and her right eye. I gagged but still kept watching. She tried to knock on the door. By banging her head on the door, I saw my neighbor running toward her with 2 bloody knives. I would let her in, but I was frozen cold in fear. So many things were running through my mind. You'll die if you open that door. Open it, don't be selfish. Just hide. He's gonna kill us. The poor girl saw that her dad was coming, and she ran to the road and waited for a car to run her over. She would prefer suicide over being killed by her father. That's heartbreaking. Her dad screamed and ran back to the house. Got to the car and started speeding and left the neighborhood. I cried myself to sleep that night, and after months I read an article explaining what happened that night. So when I dropped her off at her house, her dad had raped her mother and killed her. She went to her room and locked herself in. Her dad got the urge to kill again and told her to come out because he told her that I was there to give her something. As soon as she opened the door, he tried to strangle her. After that didn't work, he pushed her down the stairs. After that, he got a knife and stabbed her eye, her mouth, and her back. He then cut her hand and beat her with a belt. The daughter knew that the garage was open, so as soon as she got the chance, she ran out there and went to my house. After she committed suicide, her dad speeded on the road and crashed into another vehicle, killing both people instantly. To this day, I feel guilty for not opening the door for her. I could have saved someone's life and I failed. I wrote this to get this off my chest. Have a nice day. Because I know I won't. Something strange happened about 3 weeks back, and I've struggled to even put it together cohesively in my head. But I'm going to try, because I think that what happened at my sister's sleepover might actually be more widespread than I imagined. Looking back now, I don't even remember how many girls came. I think it was 10 or 12. All of them in the second grade and close to my sister Rachel.as. They got into their sleeping bags and told each other ghost stories. Me and my best friend Kurt had a devilish idea. We're going to scare these girls senseless, he said wickedly. I have to admit, it was for just cheap thrills. But I didn't see the harm. We got into my father's workshop and stole a few of his basic paint supplies to make Kurt look like a typical horror movie vampire. Then we went to the backyard and started to climb the tree outside of Rachel's window. Kurt was in place, ready to start making the usual boogeyman noises when he froze and squinted into the window. What the hell? He muttered as he tried to look in. Hey! What are you doing? Don't be a peeping Tom. I shouted up at him, trying to figure out why he was hesitating to start the scare. Then suddenly his eyes widened and he started to fumble backwards. I watched as his feet slipped from under him and he fell to the ground. It happened in slow motion. But the sound of his head hitting the bird fountain in our backyard is one that I will never forget. Jesus Christ. Kurt, are you okay? I screamed. I looked up, waiting to see if my sister or one of her friends would stare out and see this horrific accident. I tried to prop his head up and stop the bleeding. Then I reached into my pocket to call 911, but I hesitated. I know it's dumb, but my parents were already going to give me a tongue lashing for being stupid anyway. I didn't want the cops to find me for something like this, so instead I ran inside and used Kurt's phone instead. As dumb as that was, what I did next was even stupider. I went back out and after checking to make sure he was okay and not bleeding out, I decided to climb the tree and see whatever it was that had caused him to act so strangely. Slowly, I crawled up the branches and peered through the window to where my sister and her friends were sleeping, all except one. It's been so long now and I still remember that ungodly sight. One of the girls was standing there, crouching over the other girls with sharp talons extended from her fingers and fangs protruding from her mouth. Her skin was as pale as the moon and her eyes flowed a deep velvet red. I will never forget the way she slowly drained the life from one of the other girls. I could see the life force ebb its way out of her body and into this abomination. Then the girl looked straight at me. I nearly fell back like Kurt did. But instead I stared her down across the darkness. What would she do? Suddenly she raised her hand up. And the other girls began to awaken. They were all now sharing that same dark glow in their eyes. I scrambled to get out of there. I didn't even wait for paramedics to show up and help Kurt. I didn't want to be around if those vampires thought I was a threat. I've been running ever since. I even tried to check on Kurt the other day, make sure he was okay, and got the help he needed. That was a mistake. Hey bud, yeah, I'm fine. Didn't even need surgery, he said. That's great. I'm sorry I ran, but it was crazy what those girls were doing. Oh yeah, it wasn't that weird after all. Rachel showed me after the paramedics came. In fact, I think she wanted to show you too, he said in a weird voice. Something was off, bud. Where exactly are you now? Wait. Why? I asked. He was making me nervous. Was I panicking? Overreacting? We're going to find you. One way or another, his voice sounded just like one of the little girls. I hung up immediately. I know now I can't go home. I don't really know where I can go that might be safe. But I'm going to keep moving and telling as many people as I can about what I saw. The town I live in is nice enough. It's quiet, a little quaint. My dream is to move to the city once I graduate from college. I want a life where things are busier, more exciting, more alive. I live at home with my parents and my twin sister. Both of my parents are underpaid teachers, so our upbringing has been relatively modest. We've never been spoiled. We've always been told to work hard for every dollar, and gratitude for everything we have has been instilled in us since childhood. My parents must have worked really hard to save money throughout these years, because the house that we've lived in since I was a teen is pretty darn huge. Our tiny little town in general is relatively prestigious. I went online to search up the prices of houses in our neighborhood and wow. So, I do my part to extract wisdom from my parents whenever possible. Clearly, they know a thing or two about how to win at life. Out of all of the things my parents ask of me and my sister, the rule they are the most stern about is, if you're going downstairs after midnight, you have to bring someone with you. Ever since we first moved to this house, they would remind us of this rule every chance they got. They'd randomly bring it up at the dinner table, or before we'd go off to school. Sometimes, if they heard footsteps in the hallway at night, one of them would get up from bed and walk with us to wherever in the house we were going. The strangest thing about it was that me and my sister never really had any reason to go downstairs at night anyways. Our rooms, the living room, the kitchen, and pretty much everything else we used was upstairs. Sure, downstairs had a games room and some stuff we maybe needed to pull out from storage from time to time, but overall, I couldn't really think of a scenario where we'd need to go downstairs after midnight. My sister and I would ask my parents about it sometimes. Why do we have this rule? What happens if we break it? They would usually deflect, change the subject, or say, we'll tell you when you're older, dear. As I got older and older, the fact that my whole family slept upstairs, in a large 2-story house, mind you, became increasingly weird to me. I was curious about what exactly was going on. So, fresh off my 20th birthday, I decided to conjure up a situation where I'd absolutely need to head downstairs after 12 a.m. Mom, I left my laptop in the games room and I need to polish up a paper that I'm submitting tomorrow. Lame excuse, I know. She was skeptical and pushed back a little bit. Can I get up early tomorrow and finish up the essay in the morning? Why did I leave this assignment until the last minute? I was able to assuage these questions pretty easily. I thought it was due 2 days from now. I thought my laptop was in my room. I'm a little bit stressed and I won't be able to sleep if I don't finish it, etc., etc. So she ultimately obliged. We made our way down the small staircase and arrived at the door leading to the downstairs area. Before my mother opened it, she turned to me. Okay. He's likely going to latch onto me. Make sure I don't open the door to the backyard, okay? Make sure I'm with you at all times. You can pull me if you need to. I thought she was kidding. She opened the door. Our downstairs area has another small living room, a small kitchen, and a hallway that leads to our games room and our storage area. I'd accidentally left my laptop in the games room, so as we entered, I immediately turned towards the hallway. I thought my mom would follow me. Instead, I saw her, just standing there. Shivering. Jittery. Her gaze was fixed on the window in the kitchen. It's a big window, with the blinds usually pulled up. The window was a peek into our large, mostly empty backyard. I looked at my mom confusedly, as she continued her uninterrupted stare. Slowly, she started walking to the door to our backyard. Mom. What are you? That's when I saw him. Pressed against the window from the outside. His face was obscured by the darkness, but I could see his eyes. Wide open. Wider than eyes should go. Otherworldly. He looked focused. Excited. My mom continued walking to the door. I grabbed her, as hard as I could, and pulled her away, back to the staircase leading upstairs. I closed the door behind us. It took my mom a moment to snap out of it. She spent another minute staring at the door to the downstairs area, meekly trying to open it and go back to where she was previously walking to. When she finally pulled herself together, what the fuck was that? Did you get your laptop, hun? What the fuck was that outside the window? Mom's reaction was weird. A mix of annoyance, concern, and fear. She finally responded, terrible things happen when we talk about him too much. As long as we go downstairs in pairs of 2, we're always okay. No one's let him in yet. And that was that. I continued asking her as we made our way upstairs, but she just flat out ignored me. At this point, I had no idea what to do. I wanted to tell my sister, who was generally super carefree, but part of me thought that it'd only freak the hell out of her and achieve nothing. I tried bugging my dad about it, but he also deflected. At most, sometimes he'd say something like, we just wanted to make sure we could give you and your sister a comfortable upbringing, and then walk away. What the fuck? It's been 2 years since me and my mom went downstairs together after midnight. Since then, we've continued to follow the rule, and we'd thankfully never run into any problems. I've tried to convince my parents that we should think about downsizing and moving somewhere else, but they always say stuff like, "That isn't how this works, dear, and as long as we play it safe after midnight, we'll be okay." That brings me to why I'm writing this today. My parents have been gone for the week, visiting family in another state. My sister left earlier this evening to go to a sleepover with her best friend. I'm home alone. For the first time in forever, I don't usually have my phone on me. It takes me a couple of hours, at least, to read and respond to text messages. I've always been lazy about it. I recently took a look at my phone to see a missed text message from my sister. "Hey, I might have accidentally left the downstairs door open. Just an FYI, please close it whenever you get a sec." She sent this text message 4 hours ago. I read it at 10 minutes past midnight. I'm writing this from the closet in my room. So far, I think I'm okay. Maybe she's misremembering and she kept the door shut. The only thing I'm worried about is that I'm starting to shiver a little bit. And I have this inexplicable urge to get out from my hiding spot so that he can find me.